There was a tense finish in the Tata Steel Tournament 2019 with Magnus Carlsen a half point ahead of Anish Giri, and they played in the final round. So if Giri could defeat Carlsen, he would win the tournament. Before we take a look at what happened in that game, I hope you've enjoyed our coverage of the whole tournament, and if you want to subscribe to the channel, then do click on the button down there. And if you want to support the channel, then take a look at the links up there to PayPal and Patreon.com, and check out the rewards on Patreon as well. Right, on with the game. So Giri had the white pieces, and he decided to play into Carlsen's Sveshnikov variation. Now you only go in for this open Sicilian, this really sharp variation, if you've done your homework. So this was a test for Carlsen. Of course, he played this in the World Championship match against Caruana and has researched it obviously very well indeed. If you remember, Caruana played knight d5 here, but Giri went for the old main line with bishop g5. It looks like a very bizarre way to play the position. Already black is threatening to play b4. This is the old main line. Now when this variation first became popular in the mid to late 1970s, then the most popular move was bishop takes knight. But this has gone out of fashion. The old move was f5. I used to play this regularly, and it leads to absolutely crazy positions. But the modern take on this is to play bishop g7 and to play knight e7 very quickly. And theoretically, black is doing reasonably well in these positions. But instead of bishop takes knight, which is much sharper, Giri went for this quite positional continuation with knight d5. Carlsen played bishop e7 and an exchange on f6. This is absolutely normal. So you can see that this knight has found some kind of security on d5 now that the knight on f6 has been eliminated. On the plus side for black, black has the bishop pair, in particular this dark squared bishop, which doesn't look like a fantastic piece. Actually, it does have great influence over the board, and sometimes can even bounce around this way via d8 to b6 to look at f2. We'll catch that idea a little bit later. And now white's positional threat, you could say, is to play a4 in this position. Now black does sometimes allow this just by castling in this position. That's another variation, but Carlsen plays in the old way, playing rook b8, which discourages a4. If a4, then you can take, and the rook threatens the pawn on b2. I played this position on several occasions with black. My goodness, 30 years ago perhaps, even earlier than that. Probably about 30 years ago actually. And it's amazing to see that this is still played, still high fashion basically. Now the old moves here are bishop e6 or a5. So a5 prevents black's knight coming into b4. Bishop e6 looks at the knight on d5, just creates a little bit of pressure there. Both moves are okay for black. But Carlsen, after 17 minutes, played king h8. So this is a little bit unusual. And this was exactly how he played against Radyabov a couple of rounds before. And Radyabov really got no advantage. Radyabov played a3 in that game, just to make absolutely sure that b4 wasn't coming. But Giri had clearly done his homework, and played here bishop g4. Now, in principle, white wants to exchange off these light squared bishops because that will mean that the knight on d5 is far more secure, and the queen will look pretty nice on g4 as well. And well, there are two ways of dealing with this. One is the game continuation, bishop b7, or bishop e6 is possible as well. But I'm not so sure about this, because after this exchange, then this knight threatens the pawn here, threatens knight c6. And I think one factor, once these bishops are exchanged, is that the queen is very usefully employed on the king's side, actually. And white is ready to put a rook in the middle. It's much easier for white to play than black. So Carlsen, after a 5-minute think, played bishop b7, and that looks very logical to me because you want to keep an eye on d5 and through d5 onto e4 as well. These are the absolute key squares in the position. Black is fighting for control over d5. And here Giri thought for 8 minutes. Both players consumed quite a lot of time around this point. Quite a tense situation. They both realised that the game can really turn at this moment. If white can secure a positional advantage, a clamp on those light squares, then he could have a permanent advantage. So Carlsen needs to be really careful to get it absolutely right. And here Giri said after the game that he had prepared queen d3, but he didn't like the look of knight e7. Well, that's possible. It's also possible just to play g6, and sometimes you might be able to get in f5 a little bit later. But anyway, yeah, he didn't like that, so he played knight b4, which is a little bit strange, has to be said. I think at this moment he lost a bit of his ambition, actually. Carlsen exchanged. After 18 minutes, he wanted to be absolutely sure that to get this right. Now, knight takes simply allows bishop takes pawn, so we don't want to do that. So pawn takes after 7 minutes, but this isn't very attractive to double these pawns. And, well, the bishop is unmasked. So it's always nice to have that bishop trained on the knight on d5 and through d5 into e4 as well. g6, so a useful move, starts to set up potentially the pawn break f5 to undermine white's control over these squares. We can see that Carlsen's mysterious king move is actually quite sensible. It's on a dark square for a start, and if it were on g8, then there are always going to be potential checks and tricks on this diagonal. I was listening to a broadcast on ChessBase on Friday evening where Vlastimil Hort was in Hamburg at the ChessBase studios, and Vlastimil was I thought made a very perspicacious comment on Carlsen's play. He said he has a very subtle feel for his king placement in not just the end game, but in the middle game as well. And I think this is a really good example of that. I think Vlastimil hit the nail on the head. Vlastimil is a brilliant positional player, and if he says that, I think we should take note. And it certainly rings true with this move, king h8. So, seems to me that Carlsen is absolutely fine in this position already, and I think Giri was basically looking to simplify the position. I think he lost his nerve. So, an exchange here, and now bishop c6. It's a strong move. If rook takes pawn, then black wins an exchange here. Now white is going to have a bit of compensation here. Obviously that knight on d5 is an absolutely beautiful piece. Nevertheless, black has a very stable position here, and well, this bishop doesn't look like much at the moment, but when you play bishop d8, bouncing it around to b6 to look through at the f2 square, followed by f5, then you start to think, yeah, black could be better in this position. Actually, I think once the bishop hits b6, white should exchange that off very quickly. But white is not better here. Black is the exchange up. Now Giri played here, instead of taking on a6, he played bishop e2, just giving up the exchange. Carlsen said after the game that he thought this exchange sack was a bit desperate. I know what he means. You know, it seems to me there's only one side can be better in this position, and that's black. And I think the best that Giri can achieve here is a draw. Carlsen played f5, which is of course a logical move to try and undermine white's centre and potentially get through to f2 as well. It's a really interesting move here. He could have played a5. Now this is risky. f5 in a sense is a much safer continuation. But let's have a look at the idea. If pawn takes pawn, then rook b2. So you've given white potentially a strong pawn here, but the rook is very active. And after this, the queen activates as well. The queen might come to a7 to attack on the dark squares. Or in this position, if b5, then queen c8. That's just the idea that black now gains control over the c5 square. Exactly the same idea. You're probably picking up one of the main themes so far in the Sveshnikov for black, and that's to play on the dark squares and to try and hammer through to f2 one way or the other. Let's come back here, but Carlsen played f5. Logical move. Pawn takes pawn. Now, if black is going all out for a win, then you could recapture with the pawn. It's just more double-edged because obviously the king's a little bit more exposed, but Carlsen played rook takes f5. And if bishop takes pawn, then e4. You can see that black is fighting to drive away the knight here. And you know, sometimes e3 can come in as well. So I think very sensibly Giri played bishop d3, pushing the rook back and preventing e4, and then he just took on a6. So obviously white has compensation here with control over the light squares, but black is pretty well coordinated, and this is a nice move from Carlsen. Just imagine if that bishop could reach this key diagonal, and if b5, then it can bounce around this way to blockade that pawn and sit itself on b6. And I think in that kind of position, again, white, I'm sure, would have to exchange off his very strong knight here. But that would obviously be some kind of success for black. So after bishop d2, Giri retreated the queen. And here, Carlsen could play rook c8 if he wants to try and squeeze a win here and play rook c1, exchanging off the rooks. Always good to exchange off rooks if you're the exchange up. And, you know, again, if he could bounce that bishop round to this diagonal, that would be achievement. Now, very long way to go in that game, but that, if he really wants to press for a win, he could do that. But, well, he said after the game he saw a safe way to play and saw no reason to avoid this. Remember, a draw gives Carlsen tournament victory, and queen c8 is a really safe move. Giri avoided the exchange of queens with queen e4, but that allowed this simplification. And Carlsen wins the piece back like this. But pawns are getting traded here, and Carlsen decided not to mess around in any way and offered an exchange of queens. And here is where Giri offered a draw and Carlsen accepted. Why is this a draw? Well, after queen g7, white can simply exchange queens, secure the king, and in this position black can't make any progress with bishop pawn against a rook and all the pawns on the same side. And basically this is just a fortress. White can just sit there with the king, and there's nothing to do. So in the end, this game kind of fizzled out, but I was surprised that Giri didn't push a little bit harder in this game. But clearly he was just satisfied with second place and didn't want to push things too far. So after that final round, top scores: Magnus Carlsen with 9 out of 13. Anish Giri 8.5, and then 3 players on 7.5: Yan Pomnishi, Ding Liren, and Vishwanathan Anand on 7.5. After the game, Carlsen said that, thinking about his whole result in the tournament, he said, "Generally my level of play has been stable. It hasn't been sparkling, but it's been good." I think that is very modest of him, actually. I think he's played extremely well. That is his 7th Vaikanze victory, which is a remarkable record, actually, a really remarkable record. And that brings Carlsen, back up on the live list. He's still number 1, of course, he always was. But the gap between him and Caruana and the rest has increased. So Carlsen's rating on the live list is 28.44, Caruana 28.28, Ding Liren 28.11, and Giri now number 4 with 27.97. So once again, thanks very much for watching our coverage of the Tata Steel Tournament 2019. And don't forget to subscribe, buttons down there, and do support us. We would be really grateful. Thanks very much for watching, and there's lots of playlists up there in the description as well if you want to check out lots of other videos. Thank you very much. Bye now.